Hello, church. Welcome to another holiday broadcast. My name is Henry Loke. This is God's Feeding Station. Honored to be with you again today as we continue to go back to the Wayback Machine, talking about the prophecies of the coming Messiah, keeping the focus on the real reason for the season, and going back to 2013, talking about the Messianic Death today, how it was prophesied, why it had to happen. And you're going to hear today that Pastor Doug back then came down with a little bug and lost his voice, but we soldiered on. So enjoy today's broadcast, and remember, stay focused. Stay focused on what's important this holiday, and keep your vision upward on the vertical, not on the horizontal. To continue in our discussion of the reason for the season, we've been talking about the prophecies of the coming Messiah. In terms of celebrating Christmas, obviously he's come and was crucified and was buried and rose again. That's all happened. But we've been talking about the biblical accuracy of the season of Christmas and why we should really celebrate it. It's not about Santa Claus and Rudolph and Frosty and all that stuff and gifts and all that kind of stuff. It's about the Messiah, the coming of Jesus, and what he stood for, why he came, and what he did for us while he was here, freeing us from sin and judgment. And so we talked about the prophecies of his suffering, and today we take it the next step. We talk about the death of the Messiah and the prophecies surrounding that and the fulfillment of those prophecies. And we can start in Psalm 22:16. Where it's written, "Dogs have surrounded me, a band of evil men has encircled me, they pierced my hands and my feet." And then in Zechariah it says, "And I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me, the one they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child." And obviously there's a lot of fulfillment in that. Luke 23:33 is just an example. And when they come to a place called Calvary or Golgotha, there they crucified him. And so in typical fashion, Jesus was considered by the Roman governor as an outlaw, and he was dealt with as all outlaws were dealt with back then. And he was crucified, and he was crucified with two others that day. And there's actually I believe there's a prophecy about that he would be forsaken, that he would be crucified with common sinners. Isaiah 53:12 says, "Because he poured out his soul unto death, he was numbered with the transgressors." He was crucified with two other people that day. I think he was just one of many that week. We talked about that before. But as I said before, to Pilate, he was just another guy who broke the law, just somebody he had to deal with. Pilate knew he was innocent. Had to appease the Jewish religious leaders who he was in charge of, that area of the world that he was put in charge of. And so the way he dealt with it was to hand Jesus over to be crucified.
So let me jump in a little bit
Sure.
here, okay? Mm-hmm. Audience, excuse this. It's kind of a cool baritone. Maybe it's a Barry White instead of a Pastor White voice. I don't think so. Okay. Anyways, what I thought was really fascinating, we go back to that first psalm that you read, Henry, in Psalm 22:16. Uh-huh. It references this band of evil people that encircle him, mm-hmm. and a piercing of the hands and feet. Now, I just have some information here that says that to consider the fact that when this psalm was proclaimed, that the method of crucifixion was not really even anything that was happening in its day.
Right.
So I might just say, I think this is really interesting, or I think it's another sign that it wasn't like they concocted all this, because we do know there is a place called Golgotha or Calvary where he was crucified, which I'm glad you brought in the Gospel of Luke, mm-hmm. and then you brought in a little bit about Zechariah, mm-hmm. house of David, and pouring out the one that they have pierced, they will mourn for him. And I don't know what you say with this, other than how cool for me to say, okay, his death was poured out, he was pierced. You mentioned Isaiah 53:12, the suffering servant, mm-hmm. and then you've got according to Matthew 27:38, I don't know if you said that.
I didn't
one.
read it. I just
Okay.
talked about it. Yeah.
Yeah, you got a thief or a robber or an insurrectionist, whatever, on each side of him.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is just, it's too cool for school.
Right. Right.
But you're taking it from where we are today, looking backward,
Right.
and saying, okay. And
No, we talked about hindsight's 2020. We have the advantage of having the Bible and having all this laid out before us.
Yeah.
So it's easy, to kind of make the connections now. But I think, in fairness, too, though, that the religious leaders of the time had those scriptures of the Old Testament. They had all the prophecies in front of them, and they knew them inside and out. They were waiting for the Messiah to come.
They were.
And so they had those prophecies in front of them, and yet when Jesus came on the scene, most of them, I won't say all, because we talked about last time too, you have Joseph, you have Nicodemus, you have guys in the religious hierarchy who did know and understand and accept Jesus for who he was,
Right.
but most who were in power shunned him and worked to have him killed because he was a threat. I think my take on it is he was a threat in part to their power structure.
And I think we have that today. The followers of Christ are a threat to the worldly power structure.
Right.
One of the things I face regularly as a pastor is having a ordination and dealing with things that some people might think I'm anti-government, and I'm not. But I am pro-kingdom of God. And it's obvious in a fallen world that the kingdoms of the world are incomplete.
You're being paged.
Yeah, I'm being paged. It's probably
okay.
the doctor. No, I'm kidding. No, but the thing is that we are in contradiction with the kingdoms of the world. And so the King of Kings that I serve is the one who was the suffering servant. And there's been enemies surrounding him from day one. There's enemies surrounding the truth of Jesus today. And he does suffer, and his people will suffer. Mm-hmm. And what I thought was pretty interesting also, you look back at Psalm 38:11, and it talked about loved ones and friends that were going to be far off somehow. Now, how does that be fulfilled? Some would say you could go to the Gospel of Luke again, 23:49. We know that it was the women who went to the gravesite. We know that there were many women that were probably bankrolling the actual ministry of Jesus.
That's the general belief, yep.
And they stood at a distance and they watched. Mm-hmm. And there were loved ones that were nearby that were mourning. Mm-hmm. And so, I don't know, I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, there's the one that talks about that that same psalm, I think, too, can be taken into account for the people who just forsook him at some point. When he was arrested in the garden, the apostles just scattered. I mean, Peter made his way back to the trial,
exactly.
But and John made his way back to the crucifixion. But most of them were just kind of hiding out, because they were afraid of what was going down. You had mentioned too earlier that Christians are a threat worldwide, and I believe you're right. I had read an article that doesn't get a lot of play here. This type of news doesn't get a lot of play here in the U.S., but there are numerous stories, if you dig online, about Christians who are being persecuted. And, I mean, up to, I've seen numbers like up to 100,000 Christians dying every year. And mostly overseas, not you don't have that issue here, but places like Egypt, places like Syria, places like in Central Africa, the churches are still being surrounded, people are still being persecuted and that kind of stuff. And so that persecution has been going on, I guess, for a while now, and it seems to be increasing, as time goes on. And a lot of people are looking at that as a hint of end times, I think.
Sure.
And you always say, since Christ left and Christ ascended into heaven, we've been living in end times, and I think that's right. We don't try to prophesy or say that we're in end times. This is where we're at right now. But there seems to be a lot of signs out there. So who knows?
Sure. And another one. This one I don't really think the Psalm 22:17 is probably the best, but there at least was the Psalm 22:17 where it talks about that there would be the ability to count all of his bones, and that people would be staring, watching him.
Right.
Well, you could go to Luke 23 again, learn more about this story in 23:35. There were people that were just watching all this going down, and we do know that counting his bones, at least I would interpret that as some kind of picture of him on the cross hanging.
Yeah.
None of his bones were broken.
Correct.
And yet, typically, they would break the bones.
Right. Well, and it's the crucifixion thing was pretty horrific. If anybody's ever done a scientific study or watched this, every once in a while there'll be a program on like National Geographic or something like that about what was really involved with being crucified. I mean, it was basically you're hanging there, and in order just to get a breath, you would have to, and I don't mean to gross anybody out, but you would have to push up on the nails in your feet and pull up with the nails in your hands to get some air. And so the fact that, one, he was beaten pretty close to beyond recognition when he was scourged before Pilate turned him over to be crucified. And then you have all this, what the whole crucifixion thing did to a body for those hours hanging on the cross. It's kind of like we use that term. It's like, you walk past a car wreck. It's horrific, but you can't help watching.
Right.
It's just that horrific fascination with it. And I think that's part of that, what that is. And I'm sure it was quite a sight to see. And like I said, I think it was quite a sight to see daily of just people being crucified along the road as a warning to those who would step out of line concerning Rome.
Right.
I mean,
well, weirdly enough, I know of situations where people in today's culture are imprisoned in very similar to, you go down the road and you see how horrific people being tortured or whatever it is, brutalized by a system that's trying to bring justice. And yet, I see here in this country that the culture tends to turn a blind eye on our economic engine-driven punitive system that we call justice. And because I interact with people that have been in and out of the prison system, and we have a prison ministry, I am just stunned by how we whitewash and masquerade that everything's okay, when we really should be walking down the road weeping for the horrific things that are happening in the midst of a country that calls itself free. Right. But I say that because, again, I've said at the early part of the broadcast, people think, well, he sounds anti-government. No, I'm really pro-kingdom of God. And Jesus said the peace that he would give would not be like the peace of the world. And the justice that comes through and the freedom that we find in Christ is not what we have in the world. And so I think it's, to me, it all points to what began on the cross when we saw the beatings and the scourging, because the sin is just rampant. They even start dividing his clothing. There's prophecy on that as well.
Yeah, before you get to that one, though, you had talked about his bones not being broke. I'm going to jump to Psalm 34:20. It says he guards all his bones, not one of them is broken.
That's the Psalm. Thank you.
Yep. In John 19:33, it says, but when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. Now, the explanation here, I just talked about, when they were crucified, they would have to push up on that nail in their feet to catch a breath.
Yes.
And so what they would typically do then, because it could be days that somebody would last on a cross on occasion. And so what they would do is at times they would just come in and break the legs of the guys on the cross so they could not breathe. And then they would end up dying from suffocation.
Wow.
And so this was the case here. They were coming, they were at the Passover. Right, it was that day before Passover was coming rapidly. That evening it was going to start, and so they wanted the bodies down because it's Deuteronomy, right? Those left on a tree shall be cursed.
Yes.
So they wanted to make sure that everything was in line, which is really ironic, is because they did everything. This whole thing with Jesus and his trial and all that stuff was done at night. Everything went against their law, the way they conducted business here, but yet they want everything nice and tidy for the Passover, which starts in a few hours. And so they went and talked to the Romans and said, hey, we need these guys down at the start of Passover. So they send the Roman soldiers to go break the legs. They break the legs of the two, I believe they break the legs of the two guys that were crucified with him. But when they come to Jesus, he's already dead. And so there's no need to do that.
Yeah, and that fulfills the prophecy again.
Right.
The other one that it's interesting is, and I always like to use the word interesting because I do know, and I'll be the first to say, I have my own presuppositions. I've been reading the Bible for a long time, and I believe the Bible. I believe the Bible. I believe it's inspired. I even believe, as some might want to counter, that the Bible is without error. Now, when I say without error, What I mean by that is everything that God intended for the Bible to say, it says. And everything that God inspired into the Word would be true because he doesn't speak falsehoods. What I do know is that we find apparent contradictions or dating issues or things that aren't completely clear to us with finite thinking and human words. But we look at the Psalm 69, 21, where it talks about when I had my thirst, they gave me vinegar to drink. Now, this is long before the crucifixion. Once again, we have a time delay of quite a period.
400 and some odd years.
Yeah, and so then we have what many would call, and I would agree, a fulfillment of Psalm 69:21. You can learn about it in the Gospel of Matthew 27, where they give him wine vinegar, soak it on a sponge, and they lift it to Jesus' lips. We learn a little more about that in John 19:29. Okay. Mm-hmm. But the thing is that some people say, so was Jesus just doing this? In other words, is he crying out? I'm reading here that someone says there's a skeptic interjection.
Oh, right.
Yeah, where people are saying he provoked the soldiers to fulfill the prophecy.
Yeah, but he didn't control what they gave him.
Exactly.
So he just cried out that he was thirsty. They made the decision on what to give him.
He didn't say, give me vinegar.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, we talked about his bones. There's a prophecy, obviously, that he would be crucified, and this one's pretty familiar to, I think, a lot of people. Zechariah 12:10 says, "They will look on me whom they pierced," and this is, I think, for me, it covers both. It covers the crucifixion, and it covers when the soldier. We just talked about the breaking of the legs. When they come to Jesus and they see that he's dead, to make sure they ram a spear into his side. To pierce his heart, to make sure that he is dead. And that's covered in John 19:34. And again, that was to make sure that, as they came through to break the legs of everybody, they saw he was dead, so they were just making sure. And so that's the we got all kind of noises going on today.
Yeah,
I tell you,
we
weren't very I don't know. We didn't take care of all the electronic equipment before we started.
The normal distractions.
I'm telling you. But anyway, the other one, and maybe this will be the last one we cover today, the land, how the whole thing, the land would be dark, and how it went pretty much turned into night after he expired on the cross. And in Amos 8:9, it says, "It shall come to pass in that day, says the Lord God, that I will make the sun go down at noon, and I will darken the earth in broad daylight." And Matthew is the witness to this now from the 6th hour until the night hour. That should be 9th hour, probably. I think that's a misprint there. From the 6th hour to the 9th hour, there was darkness over all the land. And it's very interesting because some people have tried to push this off as an eclipse. And because of the time of year and the Passover, and Passover has to be a full moon and all that stuff, there is no astrological way. It could have been an eclipse. And then there is a mention of two historians, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce their names because I'll get it wrong, but they write, they're secular witnesses to the darkness that lasted for several hours in the middle of the day during the Passover.
Yeah, well, interesting, because I've had people tell me that science reveals that it was probably an eclipse, like you brought up. And, my answer to that is, what if it was? Let's say it was.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So who controls eclipses? Okay.
That would be God.
Yeah, that would be God. And, it's so interesting how many ways that we attempt to say, I just don't want to believe this. Mm-hmm. And I find it so incredible that God would continue to provide testimony and witness, layer upon layer upon layer, including that he'd be buried at a rich man's tomb. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the next level.
Right. And
we do know there is a tomb, Joseph Arimathea, and we can read about it in Matthew 27, 57 to 60.
Right.
I think the only answer I can give to this stuff is that we have a lot of misinformation here in the country, all over the place. We really do. Mm-hmm. In fact, I don't know who made the quote, but said, if you don't listen to the media, you're not informed. If you do listen to the media, you're misinformed. I don't know who made the quote. It wasn't me, but it's a good one.
Pretty accurate.
Yeah, okay. So then you look at the church, mm-hmm. and what I've just wants to make me weep, makes my voice scratchy, Henry, can you hear it? Yeah, is that we have allowed something so spectacular, so supernatural, so revelatory, like Christmas, to be turned into a commercial event with all kinds of carnal stimulation, when we should be proclaiming and announcing the biblical story of Jesus around the clock, every day, 365 days a year.
Right.
And so I'm thankful that we're at least going through a few of the points to help people, because the sad truth is that most Christians wouldn't even know where to turn. They don't even know really how to argue. Using the Bible to show that it's not mythological, it's not cleverly invented stories, it's not, a group of delusional people who all drank the same Kool-Aid. And yet there will be questions, and I think there should be questions. In fact, I'm going to kind of make that as my closing thing today, is all of these questions are awesome. I'm glad there are skeptics who interject things and ask things, but I'm also glad that there are scholars who have spent their lives, the call on their lives to continue to defend the Bible. And I'm excited that, Henry, that even without much of a voice today, I'm still here today in the studio, and we are pronouncing to the people who have ears to hear, wherever they are, there is a biblical story of Christmas, and Jesus is the Messiah.